Sister Marimba has a 20-year-old daughter presently attending Howard University. I think I can summarise by saying here we have an African mother, an African daughter, an African writer, an African scholar, and an African sister to us all. Thank you, Sister Marimba Ani.
Modupe, Medasi, Asante Sana. And I say Modupe to the Babalao. And I am honored by his presence here and for opening with the libation this morning. And I say Modupe, thank you to the brothers and sisters who worked so hard to organize this conference and to bring you together and to bring us over here. I really, really do thank you. This conference to me is extremely important. I don't go to conferences. I don't do conferences because I generally feel that people talk, but it doesn't lead anywhere. And this particular topic, in my estimation, is what we need in order to heal our people. We need to understand the significance and the meaning and the depth of the female principle in African civilization if we are to heal, if we are to come together as a people. And so I thank the group, the Kemetic Educational Guidance, is it right? And I thank Paul, and I thank Nene for conceptualizing this. And I'm very happy to be with my sisters. And as was taught to me by Afia and some people that we work with, I will begin by saying that I am the daughter of Delphine Douglas Richards, who is the daughter of Minnie Douglas, who is the daughter of Laura Thomas. And with that, I will begin. We begin always with an African frame of reference that has to provide the context for our thinking. And so I want to begin today with the African asili, grounding ourselves in the familiarity of the African cultural seed, the African asili, the seed of African civilization, beginning in the Ma'atic order, affirmed by the natural order, growing, developing through reciprocity. It is spiritually based, it is life-giving and life-receiving. And we gain power through connectedness. That is our definition of power. That is how we become powerful. That is our ashe. We have ashe, the power to make things happen because we are connected to the universal life force, and it manifests in us and through us. And so we seek to attain harmonious development, again, we return to the source from which we come. In the beginning was the sacred womb, the universe filled with watery substance that would bathe the newborn world, made animate and transformed into discernible energies, forces, beings, entities. From this womb process of creation came forth woman, black, human, equipped with a womb, reflection of the universal order of things, able to bring forth life. A black woman, made in the image of the universe, and from this wombness came man, the igniter, the flame, to initiate the dynamic principle, to make the world dynamic. Wombness manifested as material being, wombless. Necessary because of the pairing principle, which is the nature of all recreation, all reproduction, all proliferation. The dynamic process of appositional interaction. And so we have the African conception of the universe as sacred, the African worldview, spiritually based, a world with a spiritual foundation, spirit being the foundation of reality, spirit being the source of meaning, spirit being reality, ultimate value, spirit, the energizing force. Spirit is a way of talking about and understanding being. Matter is concrete manifestation of spirit. Matter is spirit slowed down so that we can see it and understand it concretely, easily, without deep thought. But at that level alone, that superficial level, reality has no meaning. It becomes meaningful only if we understand it as being spirit, connecting to the cosmos. Spirit is our relationship to being, to the universe, events, phenomena, to each other. Matter is form, allowing us to relate physically to spirit, to reality. Spirit also manifests as ideas, in spirit, inspiration, or as the springboard to erection, insurrection, resurrection, ma'at, ma'afa, sankofa, construction, deconstruction, reconstruction. Spirit and matter are terms for how we conceive things. The cosmos tells us that all being is organically interrelated and interdependent. Spirit is energy. The universe is energy. Spirit is a bonding agent. Matter conceived without spirit cannot be connected, cannot join, cannot have meaning. From spiritual energy comes material reality. All of this we understand because of female consciousness in African thought, in the African worldview. On the deepest level, everything is one. Everything is potentially there in the oneness of things. But the universe becomes dynamic through interaction of energies and forces. Femaleness, the principle of existence. Maleness, the actuality of existence. We have to be able to conceptualize difference so that we can have these two energies which interact in a very special way. In order to be able to explain the beginning of motion, we must have the feminine and the masculine. Again, these terms represent a relationship of cosmic forces. And so the language that we use to understand energy and the cosmos is a language of sexuality, of generation and regeneration. The feminine and the masculine can only be defined in terms of each other, insofar as they describe a relationship of a special nature. And so we speak in the language of sexual metaphor, understood symbolically. Sexual metaphor to conceptualize the interaction of energies and forces, of creation, recreation, generation, and regeneration. And so now we are speaking on a metaphysical level, on a philosophical level. If we look at how these concepts are understood in African cosmological language, African symbolic language, the language of African symbolic systems or mythic systems, we can understand the relationship between Mawu and Lisa among the Fon people in Benin, ancient Dahomey, where Mawu represents the moon, the night, the elder, the gentle, the forgiving, rest, coolness. And Lisa represents the sun, the day, is angry, can exact punishment, has physical strength and heat. These two represent an appositional unity which is necessary for the functioning of the world. And so we can refer to Mawu as the female principle, or I would rather say the Mawu principle, and not be constrained by the language of the oppressor. All African cosmologies use this model of appositional unity. And what we mean by appositional is when you have two things pairing so that they necessarily must work together. Just like when you say that the thumb is apposite, meaning that it allows us to grip with the rest of the fingers. That's appositional, not oppositional. So let us attempt to understand this Mawu principle, which has been so maligned, so neglected, distorted, feared, denied, as we take ourselves back through a journey into the African self. African cosmologies, again, use metaphor and analogy And they use the language of fertility. Any African people that you go to and want to learn their cosmological explanations of how things come to be will talk in terms of fertility and the sacredness of fertility, in terms of joining and conception and birth and development and growth and maturation and degeneration, death, and then rebirth. This is how the universe is talked about. It is a vision of a sacred cycle, the cycle which energizes and which is based on the exchange of energy and the interaction of forces. So in this view, in the African worldview, in this concept of the sacred universe, agriculture becomes a spiritual activity. Women are agriculturalists, and their fecundity fertilizes the earth as the earth fertilizes them, or us. This reciprocal relationship between women and the earth makes them the first agriculturalists. Nature becomes symbolic of sacred, transcendent truth in the African view. Fertility is sacred. Agriculture is sacred. Sexual relationship between men and women is sacred and is supposed to be sacred. Conceiving life is sacred. Generating life is sacred. Fertility is a female power. The male sperm activates. It is outer. It is entering. The female power gives birth to the male who produces the sperm. And so we have the sacred cycle. The African concept of sexuality is linked to a sacred ontology honoring human spirituality, as Sister Halima said earlier. Life, cosmos, sacred, divine. Sexuality is a special kind of connectedness with implications for consciousness, not just physical joining, but it is transference of energy, transmitting energy, exchange of energy, interaction of energy, becoming one consciousness. It is therefore ritual. And this joining takes one outside of oneself, outside of the physically limited self, which we usually perceive ourselves to be. It is the physical doorway to the metaphysical. Sexuality is very important in African consciousness. It is part of the rhythm of the universal life force. So that necessarily this interaction between male and female is sacred, it is special, it is ritualized, has to be within that context so that neither women nor men can be objectified as sex partners. The concept of sex is not an African concept in that sense. It is not profane. Sexuality is sacred. There is a difference between sexuality and sex as it has come to be defined and understood within European culture. Promiscuity is not possible within the sacred context of the African understanding of the universe. social interaction between men and women is necessary for inspiration and creativity. Interaction between a man and a woman is necessary philosophically for understanding and wisdom. So that connection between the two of us makes it possible for both of us and either of us to do what we have to do. And so as we come to understand the importance of African women for the healing of the race, understand that we cannot do what we have to do without inspiration from African men. And so I'm trying to build here a sense of what happens, what is generated when we think with an African mind, when we understand the universe in terms of an African concept of the universe, when we become comfortable with the female principle in African thought, when we become comfortable with what the physical means in relationship to the spiritual. And we become comfortable with the mother principle and with mother consciousness. Then we aren't afraid of sexuality and we don't make it profane. And we understand that the Mawu principle really cannot be translated, because it is beyond gender, and it is certainly beyond sex. But it provides a context for understanding gender and for understanding sexuality. But let's look at what happens when you have a different kind of consciousness. We're going to pay homage to a brother who's been mentioned a number of times and will be mentioned again, and that's Cheikh Anta Diop and what has been called his two-cradle theory. If we can just look at it quickly, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but if you're not familiar with this, you need to be, because while Cheikh Anta Diop is praised and honored as being one of the greatest scholars, thinkers, historians, anthropologists, and so forth, scientists in the sense of chemist, physicist, and so forth, the focus of his analysis, or the key to his analysis of the southern cradle as opposed to the northern cradle, is really ignored, because nobody wants to go there. But he based his comparison of African and European worldview, really, African-European civilization, the contrast between those two, he based it on the difference between matriarchy and patriarchy. And then to go further, which is really the important thing, his understanding of the unity of African civilization was based on what he called matriarchy. Yet nobody pays much attention to that, because that would tell us what it is we need to know about ourselves. If we understood what it is that Diop was saying and then took it even further than he did, because that's what our job is to stand on his shoulders. The work of Ife Amadiume everybody here needs to know this is a sister who is from Nigeria, who was mentioned earlier by Sister Nene. She is the one who has pointed to that emphasis in Diop's work and has carried it on and gone beyond him, even critiques Diop. But she talks about African matriarchal foundations. It says that we have conveniently ignored that aspect of Diop's work. So you can see in an outline form, you look at the, I hope everybody can, well, I guess the words are kind of small for you. Can you see that? You can't read it. Okay, sorry. Because that shouldn't be. I know that's frustrating. Basically, what he does is to show a difference between, a contrast between the southern civilization and northern, southern being Africa, northern being where the Aryans were, being Europe. And he says that basically, and what this is also supposed to be, we got to make this darker, is a brain. So on your left are the Aryans, and on your right we have Africa, just to kind of help with this symbolism here. But he says that because of the way of life that was forced upon people in the Northern Cradle, what developed was a male-dominated society. And that led to individualism, it led to competition, aggression, and so forth. Whereas in the southern civilization, which was prior to the northern in its development, we had an agriculturally based society. You had a sun-filled environmental area which was conducive to agriculture. And then who were the agriculturalists? It was the women. So women became very important in this society. Now, it shouldn't be reduced simply to an environmental difference. Okay? It also has to do with a spiritual essence in two very different people. But Diop's view helps us to see this, and he calls them cradles because these two different areas give birth to two different worldviews, two different ways of understanding life, two different value systems. Okay? And from that, we can take that and work with it and build with it. We end at the bottom, we see that even in terms of cosmology, the Aryan Northern European civilization worshipped fire, Diop says, because it was cold. Okay? And a male sky god. The significance of the sky was that it was remote, it was far away. Also, it becomes anti-nature, whereas in African southern cradle, the land is sacred. We have a divine mother principle. So this is Diop's view. Now, before we move to that, it's very important for us to understand what Nene has said in terms of when a religion puts onto you certain images, and then you have to relate yourself to that image. It's extremely important for what it does to people, what it does to relationships, what it does to family. Okay, so moving from Diop, let us see what this has done to the African mind. This is very real. This is the image of God. that African people relate to in Ghana, West Africa, in Accra, on billboards, this is what you will find now, today, if you go there right now. In a country of black people, this is the image of God. Read Francis Cress Welsing. The Color God, and I can't remember the name of that particular essay, but it's in the ISIS papers, directly talking about this, what that does to a people psychologically. Okay, this is related to Job's analysis. It is related to what we're talking about today. There was a reason that they attempted to destroy the mother consciousness. And let's look at that. Let's look at European patriarchal consciousness. What is the myth of Urugu? Who is Urugu? The Dogon people say that in the beginning, Ama, the creative principle, created all beings with the duality that Paul talks about, or the complementarity that Mama Halima talks about. And so each of these primordial divine beings, as the earth was being, as the world, the universe was being created, had a male and a female twin soul. But one of those beings, in his arrogance, tore himself away from the gestation process, and so was aborted, or aborted himself, so that he could compete with Ama, the creator, and sought to create his own world, and found that everything that he created was incomplete, was deficient. Why? Because he himself was deficient. Because he had been aborted before he had his female twin soul. And so you had an incomplete being, and that being was Urugu. And Urugu was never able to become whole because he could never get his female twin soul. So he was destined to always be an incomplete being who would cause chaos and disorder in the universe and destruction. And that's all he could do. And that's a metaphor for European cultural thought and behavior. The European consciousness is based on opposition between the self and other, opposition which is made into a comparison which becomes superior to inferior, which sets the stage for dominance of the superior over the inferior. And so we have hierarchy. These become value dichotomies, splits. European consciousness is based on splits, separations, dichotomies. Because what they understand, how they function, is always in terms of conflict. If there's not conflict there, they're going to create it. Has to be. Because that's the only way that they function. They cannot function in harmony. So they cause disharmony wherever they go so that they can be comfortable, because that's their comfort zone. You understand that? The separation which they seek makes joining impossible. Okay, we began by talking about spirit and joining. Okay, that's the Mawu principle. For them, joining is impossible. You can't join, you can't love. They're never able to complete the circle, never able to be whole. And so what is constructed is an ego, as distinct, as isolated. This is how they define individual, as separate, as isolated and threatened and antagonistic, at war with the world, at war with everything, at war with nature, a perpetual imbalance, destructive, exploitative. Their conceptions always polarize. And everything, by the way, for us is not complementary. There is one opposition which we need to understand, and that is everything that is opposed to the way for African people, our way. The European worldview and the African worldview are opposites. Understand? They're not complementary in any kind of way. They are opposites. As our consciousness is Europeanized, our relationships become disastrous. Our organizations are defunct, or they don't work well. We become immobile, our communities disintegrate. The Greek consciousness begins in separation of the psyche from the cosmos. Then separation of the Greek male human from female barbarian animal. That's the Greek dichotomy. Fearing the female, fearing the mother, yet needing the mother. Let's look at that deeply. Okay, now suppose if Africa comes first, you fear, then you hate, but who do they need and who do they use? Europeans use Africans to mother them. That should be very painful for us, for you. I don't know how it is here, but in New York, what you see are our women mothering their children. Do you understand what I'm saying? While our mothers' children are back in Jamaica, motherless. Do you hear what I'm saying? It may be painful to hear. And it's always been that way, in that they have always used us to be their mothers, because within their civilization they do not have a mother principle. So understand the significance of some of these analyses that come to us from these geniuses among us. Think again now about what Job is saying when he talks about this patriarchal worldview and society, you see? And think also about the fact that fertility is sacred among African people. And think also about the fact that nature is despised, feared among Europeans. So what happens? There aren't too many Europeans in the world. Does that sound funny to you? You don't agree with me? What percentage are they of the world's people? You have any idea? Find out. You grew up probably thinking that they were majority because you lived in England or lived in the United States. They are less than 1/10 of the world's population. And I say to you that that is connected to how they feel about themselves, just like Dr. Welsing would talk about. Okay, there are connections to worldview, to behavior, and to being. Worldview isn't just in the head. It is reflected in your being, in the energy, just like Mama Halima said. Okay, thought becomes, it is real, it is energy. So if you desecrate the principle of the interaction of human beings, you become incapable, you see, of having that interaction. That's how I see it. It becomes devalued. And then what Dr. Welsing says is that they are ambivalent about reproducing themselves. Okay? Now, we can look at patterns in history. Look at archaic European culture, if you could call it that. Indo-Europe, what people have called Indo-European, which is really a linguistic term. Aryan, Diop uses that term. Tumuli civilization we talked about. This period initiated a destructive onslaught of invasion towards the southern cultures between the years of 2300 to 1500 years before the Common Era. You have patterns of migration and conquest with Aryan hordes invading southern cultures. And what did they do when they invaded them? What did they bring with them? They brought patriarchal gods. And they displanted and demeaned the Divine Mother everywhere they went. So what Nene has talked about in terms of the colonial experience in Africa was a pattern that started long, long, long before. It is part of the way of the life of Urugu. You've got to look at these patterns and see what history is teaching us. So the abuse of women initiated in the European experience has been a consistent pattern. So they abused African women. And then, as our consciousness became their consciousness, what did we do? We abused our own women. Their history represents a violation of the Earth Mother principle. And I'm not going to repeat what Nene talked about. But it is important that you go away understanding that we've got to act on this. We can't just say it and feel good about it and clap and feel good about it and so forth. But it is extremely important to understand what this does as a God concept. A God coming from a mother that's sterilized. What does that do to the concept of women? What does that do to African women? To African women who naturally were taught to love themselves. A God not born of woman, not born of woman and man together, not born of woman and man coming together physically. Ideologically, that is a conception which is against heterosexual intercourse. And it paves the way for the male homosexuality which we see among the Greeks and later European societies, where women are degraded. The divine feminine is desacralized and denied. Mary is the opposite of the African mother. Mary gives birth through heavenly grace, making her subordinate to nomadic worship of the sky, male, sky, God. No Madonna and child. They have taken Aset and Heru and turned it into a travesty. Their culture does not generate the divine mother, mothering, nurturing. Aryans have lost respect for women, children, animals, the universe, for everything. Nature. In Aryan languages, time and space are distant and are talked about in terms of separation. In African Earth Mother languages, time is continuous, cycles, interlocked, connections between various levels, overlapping, potential time, sacred time, transcendent time. So this consciousness, this patriarchal consciousness, has implications at every level of the culture. Among the Aryans, the highest honor was for a man to die in battle and to go to Valhalla. Do you know what that is? That's the warrior heaven. And the bloodier your death, the better it was. What kind of people worship something like that? We must be very careful that we do not perform as their gladiators. You understand what I'm saying? Their sport was to get slaves to fight with each other, which entertained them and sexually aroused them. Are we doing that now? The word for slave and domesticated animal were the same. The word for slave and domesticated animal were the same in these archaic European languages. All of this is a Europeanized definition of maleness. So it's normal for them, but it's sick for us. It is pathological for us. We understand then this patriarchal consciousness. We understand what it has created. Nene referred to Paul and some of the things that he said. I'm going to read you something that Paul said in his first letter to Timothy. Women should learn in silence and in all humility. I do not allow them to teach or to have authority over men. They must keep quiet. For Adam was created first and then Eve, and it was not Adam who was deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and broke God's law. But a woman will be saved through having children if she perseveres in faith and love and holiness with modesty. This kind of sentiment is the source of European feminism. It comes out of the nature of Europe, not Africa. In Platonic thought, devaluation of women is a very strong theme. Male sexuality is seen as the highest form of physical, romantic, spiritual love. They use the word spiritual. Male homosexuality. Men look inside themselves for wholeness, and then women respond to this by doing the same thing. Rejected, they attempt to become men, as Nene has already told us. In the Republic, it is said that men who fail to become philosophers would be reborn as women in their next life for punishment. And no woman could be a philosopher because no woman was thought capable of the kind of thought that you had to have to be a philosopher. The centrality of the Mawu principle in African consciousness and worldview demands that we confront and question any religious formulation that demeans motherhood, that submerges or oppresses us while exalting a male father principle isolated as God the Father Almighty without divine mother. In this pathological Urugu view, giving birth becomes a form of control of women rather than an affirmation of sacred origins and the recreation of human beingness. In these religions, female spirituality becomes evil, wicked, antisocial. Let's look at that, and let's look at how much we have taken that view on. Because after we look at them, then we're going to have to look at us. Okay? Patriarchy means more than the rule of men. Rather more importantly, it represents the dominance of a certain kind of thought and a certain kind of behavior. And so we need to look at the effect of European consciousness on African people. As we imitate forms that are destructive for us, such as European feminism, which originates in European history and European consciousness, we repudiate the mother principle. We repudiate Africa. Europeans have come to be, that is, they were created out of antagonism between men and women. Their culture represents a fear of the female principle based on male and female competition. Ambivalence about the female body. Rejection of femaleness by men and women. And we have lost balance in imitation of Europe. It's more than a question of having more women in roles of authority. It's much deeper than that. Our men fear the femaleness in themselves. They fear connectedness. They fear intimacy. And so do we. And so the fabric of our African nation is weak and frayed. As a people, we have bought into the European model, which fears love, which demeans the feminine, which desecrates the mother, Africa. We have succumbed to European domination and not corrected the brothers in their attempt to subordinate sisters. We have not allowed the female principle to heal our wounds. And so we have distorted menstrual taboos, involved in witch cleansings. Women are not supposed to be too aggressive. Patriarchy is imposed on matriarchal forms. All of this strangles our culture. Capitalism has made our women marginal in our economic systems. And now we have become agents of the IMF and the World Bank. Ife Amadiume says that elite African men, by that she means those who have been trained in European schools, are seeking to form a, quote, masculine imperialism, unquote. This is African men doing this now, okay? And women's associations, which we're going to look at in a minute, as, again, as Nene said, have lost their power. Have lost, there's an attempt to have them totally lose their influence. African scholars, again, are ignoring the fundamental basis for Diop's argument regarding the cultural unity of Africa. Now, what this is about, it says Yurugu in the African. And it talks about the idea, the illness, the sickness that results when we become hosts to the Yurugu virus. The virus exists in us and replicates itself in us. And so our behaviors become anti-African. We become self-destructive in imitation of the European, and the more we imitate the European, the weaker we become. The more we seek their power, the weaker we become. The more we seek their power, the more we become disconnected from our source. And we can focus on the outside, and we can wear our African clothing, and have on all the right things, wear our ankhs and so forth. But what's going on inside? We got to come back to that. I'm going to come back to that in a little while. We've got to return to the African matriarchal consciousness. Now I want us to look at what is our birthright. Let's understand what this thing is that we are rejecting out of fear. The African matriarchal consciousness doesn't separate Mawu, essence, from Lisa, existence. Lisa, by the way, is a male term in Fon language. African consciousness gives deference to and draws energy from the powers of the earth. The fertility of the earth makes us fertile. We are a fertile people, we the people of the fertile time, as Aikwe Arma has told us. In the African matriarchal consciousness, the primal matrix, the great womb, female consciousness is the creative process, conceived as the divine mother. And the divine mother takes part of her womb to create the male and then joins with the male. African consciousness takes this principle of femaleness and raises it to the level of the sacred, understands it, comprehends it, apprehends it, in its expanded form. Mother, principle, blackness, life, melanin, creator of life, sustainer and transformer of life. The womb is black and becomes blacker with pregnancy. All of this is made concrete in African social organization. Let's look at what it really means in concrete terms. Get away from all this abstract for a minute. Nene has mentioned Idemili. I'm not saying it like she says it. This Ifi Amadiume points to as an all-powerful divine being. And women among the Igbo are strongly linked to this force. This force of Idemili, this divine mother, connects women to their spirituality, to their self-esteem and their aspirations. And so we have systems like the title-taking system. I think that's the next one. No. What did I do? Nope, I skipped something. Okay, let's see the title taking. What's this one? Okay, let's just quickly, what I'll do is go through these. This shows female-male complementarity. Also, Nene referred to this as bicameral. This would take different societies and show that on the left you have the male leader of the people. You have on the right a female leader of the people. So among the Ashanti people, for instance, or the Akan people, you have the Asante Hene. And then you have the Asante Hema, who is the mother of the nation. You have the Oman Hene, where you, there would be more Oman Henes or Henes among the Ashanti people, and you have the Ohema for every, you understand? We have complementarity here. We have appositional unity. This is real. This is not abstract. This is not theoretical. This is what we find in African civilization. Now, there is a mistake here. The Oba Panin should be on the other side. That's the female. And that is the leader of the Abuzia. Abuzia is the family, is the clan, is the extended family, the lineage. It is the fundamental unit or organization that the whole nation or empire is built on, okay, the Abuzia. And it is, the female leader would be the Oba Panin, the male leader would be the Abasua Panin. And here, Nene mentioned the Omu. Among the Igbo people, you have the Obi, who would be the male leader. And then, I think this is among the, I'll come back to that. I'll have the name for that in a minute. The people are the Baminke, I think it is, in southern Africa. And also the next one would be in southern Africa. And the term, the male term for Amukulu, I don't have it in the language. It would be, you know, what people translate as king. Let's have the next one. So this is an example of complementarity in political structure, okay? And there are many more examples. Here's the title-taking system, okay? Now, let's see what this represents. This is, among Igbo women, we're looking at concrete instances of how matriarchal consciousness works out and manifests itself in African civilization. So we're taking it away from, taking it beyond the theoretical at this point. What the title-taking system is a way in which women can achieve prestige in a society, status in the society based on their own merits, based on their own accomplishments. So it is achieved as opposed to being ascribed. If it's ascribed, then you're born into that, you know, it's nothing that you did to get it, right? Or it might be because you're married to so-and-so. This isn't like that, okay? This is a system where you move from one stage to the next because of your involvement in the society. Most of that involvement, or a lot of that involvement that's highly valued, is in economics, okay? And as you reach another stage, you would wear particular kinds of beads. That is, someone who was in the culture could recognize, oh, she's in Ikanga because of how she's dressed. Now that's important. What does that say in terms of woman self-esteem? What does it say about their position in the society? Okay? Motherhood binds the nation among the Igbo. You have Oma, Umune, Ibene. These are groups of people who are blood related through the womb. Through the womb. The womb connection. You got to feel it, sisters. It's extremely important in terms of African civilization, as an organizing principle, as a political principle, as an economic principle, as a spiritual principle, the womb connection. You understand what I'm saying? Is extremely, extremely important. The mother among the Igbo gives her children and the society the pot of prosperity. You ever know about a tradition where the pot is passed on through generations of women? Anybody see the film Daughters of the Dust? That happens there. And that's an Igbo tradition that we're talking about there. But it's in other parts of Africa as well, because the pot has in it the secrets of healing, the knowledge of the family that is passed down through the women. That's that sacred pot that is passed down. Okay? These things are very, very important. Let me just do a few more to show you just a little bit about, okay, mothers of the nation. These in various African societies represent women who are considered to be the mothers of the nation, the leaders of the nation. Motherhood, Mutnera, is a divine principle which carries with it the sanctioning of behavior within the society. And these are all different societies, Iyalode and Yoruba. Different societies in which we find the same principle. You have the mother of the nation. And we could do more and more. Let's have another one here. I'm just going to show you some things about Igbo very quickly. What I'm showing you here is the degree of organization among women. Nene talked about networking. It's not just that the women said, well, you know, I want to get in touch with other women. It's that in the history and tradition itself is embedded structures that guarantee that women, every woman, participates in the decision-making of that society. They don't leave it up to chance, okay? So you have the title-taking system that we've already said. You've got the Omu, who is the mother of all of this, right? Her council or cabinet that she calls together, the Ilogo, Then you've got in each village, a section will send a representative to a council, and that will be called an Marimba Ani. You see that? You have the Mikiri, which represents all the women coming together in a particular village, and then the whole thing is within the world of the market. This is how they're organized. Let's have another one very quickly. And I think I'll skip some. No, let's do another one. Do the next one, please. This, I wanted to show you this one. This is a misspelling. It should be Umuada, okay? Umuada. Let me tell you what this means. In every village, the women who were born in that village will be organized into an association called Umuada. Just by birth, you're in it. You make decisions together, you meet together, you speak on issues together, you confront issues together, all right? But now let's say you marry a brother in another village. So what happens to you there? You're not in the Umuada in that village, right? Because you weren't born in that village. So they got another organization. You're in the Inyamedi in that village. Why? Because the Inyamedi is made up of women who have married into the village. You see how it works? All right. Now, the Umuada is more important in any village than the Inyamedi. So you might say, well, that puts those people at a disadvantage. But there's an answer to that if you see how the system works. Tell me what the answer is. If you go back to your village, you're in the Umuada. You see, this is organization. We think we're inventing organization. This is organization. So they had much more than a network. They had an organization that was able to mobilize millions of women in a way that the men had not done, by the way. When the women thought that they were going to be taxed, they said, oh, no. And they organized, and what did they use? They used their traditional ways of organizing because they were used to doing it. They didn't have to create it. This was part of their tradition. So in our tradition is participating in the decisions that affect our lives. In our tradition is providing for ourselves and our children. That's in our tradition. Is a consciousness of the strength of being female. Okay? I'm going to skip the rest of those. Skip that one. Maybe we can look at another time. Okay, here, just to give you an idea, let's move to something else. One of the strong things for women in African civilization, and this was mentioned, the Inyom Nobi, is that you have women's associations. Some people call them women's secret societies, whatever. But they are places for sisterhood, and sisterhood is developed. Women support each other and teach each other. Okay, and we continue that tradition, We had organizations like the Daughters of Africa. When we came out of chattel slavery, and we would help each other if we needed to bury a member of the family and we didn't have money, we would get together and put our little pennies together through these associations. Sunday Society. How many of you have heard of Sunday Society? You need to read about that. There's a book called Radiance from the Waters by Sylvia Boone. The Sunday Society is not just something which is defunct and part of the past, it is growing, has millions of women in it who are Mende and other groups around Sierra Leone and other countries bordering Sierra Leone. And what they do is deal with all issues, not just what would be called women's issues, but they train women to become astute in political affairs, and they conduct rites of passage for young women. A very powerful organization which is parallel to the Poro Society, which you may have heard of, which is the male society. So these represent those societies. These represent rituals of female power and sacred space. The third one, there should be K-P-A-N, not K-T. I want to give you just examples of women's organization. Okay, these are women icons in history, people we should have heard about. Among the Lovadu, what is known as the Rain Queen, Amina, Nzinga, Ya Santiwa. These are all, again, a misspelling. There should be a P here. Candace, Hatshepsut. These are realities. These are women in history, specific women who made history. This is our heritage. This is our legacy. This is what we come from. Matrifocality. No, I'm not ready for that yet, please. Matrifocality, mother focus, the importance of women in kinship terminology. All of these things we need to understand. Let me move on to thought. I'll skip some of this. I want you to see how the female principle figures into how we think. I've taken this from the Dogon people, where Jerry So represents word at face value. That's superficial knowledge. Literal, first level. I say it's sight without vision. Benny So, word from the side. Perspective, you're gaining perspective. Bolo So, word from behind, you're penetrating, going inside, going into. And Sodai, clear word, you're gaining vision. So Tani, astonishing word. This is mythic, deep word, moving to deep thought. And finally, Aduno So, the universal word. We can look at this as a process of gaining knowledge, also as a process of self-knowledge. Let's look at some concepts of truth and see how the female principle can be seen in these concepts. These are terms that come from the Ewe people and the Akan people. Nyano, truth is a living principle. It is about life. It gives life. Truth is creative. Truth produces life. Nyatefe, if the truth is planted, it will germinate and grow. If planted, the truth will bear fruit. Nyagbagbe, truth is the word of life. It is a living principle. Truth is female, they say, because it is able to bring forth life. Now, this is in our languages. This is what we mean by a matriarchal consciousness. We're not talking about domination of men when we use the term. Do you understand that? Or if I talk about the Mawu principle, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about balance. We are talking about balance. And we are also talking about the female principle or the Mawu principle on a spiritual level as an energy We've got to understand that in terms of its depth. Philomena Steady has a book, The Black Woman Cross-Culturally. And in it, she talks about what she sees at what she calls black feminism. I wouldn't use that term. She says that black women are essential for the survival of the culture, and that they come from a tradition of self-reliance, and that they have refused to hide under male protection, meaning that to use that as an excuse for not doing anything. That's not what we do. That they are resourceful, and that they do not hate their men. It's very important. That they are comfortable with the female body. Okay? They don't want to be liberated from their body. That's also important. And that in our culture is the importance of mothering and childbearing, and that we don't see that as being contradictory, again, with liberation. And that the principle in the culture is women's cooperation, sisterhood, women's associations. And there is a centrality of children, which actually helps men and women to relate better because they're focused on the children. We've lost that. That's what we have to regain. We have to also look at female rites of passage. That the feminine divine force and power is nurtured in girl children who are socialized through the process of womanhood training. Trained and taught and encouraged to realize and actualize their potential for growth, for leadership, for moral and spiritual development, and that they are groomed for the role which they are going to have to play in healing our society. That's what we need to be doing in female rites of passage, where our young girls can be taught to be mothers and teachers and warriors. We've got to help our youth, male and female, to deal with strength and to make decisions and choices which are good for African people. We've got to ground these young females in their Africanness, African culture, and African values. We've also got to provide them with a collective of brothers and sisters for life who will support them and who they will support. And that's what happens. And we've got to teach them how to connect spiritually, or let them learn that from within themselves because they know how to do it. We've got to teach them how to call on the strength of their ancestors and equip them to face challenges. Teach them about their sexuality. Help them to be comfortable with their femaleness. These are the things that we have to do. Let's look at the divine very quickly, the divine feminine personified. Just to give you some examples, Neith, Het Heru, Aset, Mat, Asasaya, and so forth. I mean, we could go on and on. There's a reason that these principles exist. They exist because they reflect the conception of the universe. And they are African, and they are ours. And they are symbols of a reality, of a deep reality, of a mother principle, of a healing principle, of a warrior principle. This is our tradition. This is what we have to reclaim. The divine mother makes whole that which has been fragmented. What does Aset do? What did Aset do? She put the pieces back together. That is the most essential function of the mother in the present state of African people. But she can't perform this function if she is not honored, if she is not nurtured and taught to love herself. She cannot be prepared to be Aset Asasaya, the earth. Yemoja, ultimate personification of motherhood, the ocean, birthplace of life, queen of mothers. Oya, wind that tears up and renews. Destruction of the old, making way for the Shango, the warrior. Oya is powerful. Cyclones, tornadoes, together she and Shango make hurricanes when they are necessary. And I want to tell you a bit about Oshun. Oshun, Ia Mio, mother of waters, fresh water, the sustenance of the earth, the nurturing place of the food chain. Oshun is the purifying water at the beginning and end of ritual. Oshun, water, feminine, essential to life, indispensable to life. Oshun as mirror makes reflection possible, which is necessary if correction is to occur. Oshun is a river, and as such is a living organism. Oshun, water, feminine. Electricity, masculine. Shango. Water conducts electricity. Oshun, water, cools down Shango, who is fiery energy. Water can convert or ionize substances. Do you see that through the Orisha, through these divine concepts and principles, we learn the universe. We learn physics. We learn metaphysics. We learn chemistry. Oshun facilitates the ability to transform at all levels of life. Oshun, like Het Heru, has the ability to attract. Water contains hydrogen bonds and is the universal solvent, and thereby becomes the matrix that is the womb for the structural components of the cell. And we could go on and on about Oshun. Oshun carries and contains the prenatal spirit of rain coming to earth. Her waters are receptors of these spirits. The process of directing and channeling the waters throughout the land represents the life process. We need to study these concepts. We don't have time to do that here. What I want to do, okay. Let's look at this. Where is he? Is he there? There he is. Mario, what do you see? What do you see? We talk about the divine. And this information I was given by my brother Mario, because I was talking about the divinity and the divinity of the womb. This is Madunetta, the language of our ancient ancestors of Kemet. Look at it. This is what Brother Mario showed me. The Ka. Have you heard of the Ka? The Ka, divine spirit. Have you heard of that? Need to know about that, right? Spirit, essence of being. What could be called the Asili, right? Well, look at the word for vagina. Look at it. Why does it have Ka in it? How are we taught to think about that? Be honest. It's dirty. Something you're ashamed of. That's not what our ancestors said. Look at the next one. Look at the signs. You see, Mario is saying that if in looking at the signs and the symbols will tell us things. If we look at the signs, they didn't just accidentally make these things. Look how they put "to be pregnant." That is a sign of a female there. That's what that tells us. Determinative, right? Is that what that would be? Okay. To be pregnant is like saying to carry the ka, the divine spirit comes through the vagina. What does that make the vagina? Sacred. How do you treat something that's sacred? Do you abuse it? Do you rape it? Think about it, brothers. Do you use it? Do you manipulate it for your own lust? How do you treat something that's sacred, that carries the ka, the most divine thing about us? It's in the language. Divine mother, mother of God, mutnera, sacred mothering function, essential nurturing principle in nature. How did we originally learn to care for one another? What was the first model for human relationship? Not a concept, but an experience. A woman carried a child in her womb and so learned about human interrelationship in the most intimate way possible, an organic part of her physical being, taught her that human beings are connected, a spiritual truth. She learned that all is spirit and that spirit and matter are one. She watched and felt as spirit manifested as material being, taking new, old form. Inside her body, the nourishment of her body, her blood gave life and breath. Blood is oxygen. Blood is life. Blood, manga, among the Kikongo, is genetic transformation. Blood is relationship between human beings and becomes the basis for cultural, social, political, economic connection. A woman sacrifices her blood every month, symbolizing her life-giving power. The male sperm is the fuel or fire which initiates the process of birth and gestation when it joins with female energy, but the womb is the water which transforms that potential into a living being. A woman transforms herself into a new part of herself, enabling human potential to become actualized as a human being inside herself. In this way, a woman experiences, lives a creative and developmental process in the most intimate relationship to another human being that is possible. A man experiences that intimacy only in the womb. In joining with a woman sexually, he attempts to experience the womb again. And he cannot experience that with another man. Her flesh, the woman's flesh, the sacred woman's flesh, makes the flesh of another. Her blood flows into her or his veins. The father's responsibility initially is to prepare himself spiritually so that at the moment of conception, in the act of kembana, making love, the energy atmosphere will be favorable for the manifestation of the new soul that will be housed in the fetus that is created. The mother has the tremendous responsibility of carefully watching her environment, what she eats, what she images, who she sees, who she relates to, her thoughts, her feelings. All of these things transmit an ancestral being and ancestral consciousness and identity to her baby. Some have said that this is the origin of all human social organization. Women carry within their placentas the history of the race. This is a sacred trust. We must understand this womb experience to have special significance for us. It is a special place, the safest place possible. The most sacred space and divine space possible is the womb. The womb is strengthening. All other human African relationships become attempts to approximate the womb. If we are well, we know that. To deny it in fear makes us sick. So we look at the Divine Mother principle, the first healers, teachers, moral leaders. And now let's look at Ma'at. Ma'at, a female principle. Truth, justice, reciprocity, righteousness, balance, harmony, right order. A synthesis of moral concepts, heart, balancing, a feather. We know that, but let's look at Ma'at as process. Ma'at as process engages us in a dialogue with the self as only the female principle can do. Ma'at as process. I have not caused anyone to suffer. I have not taken milk from the mouths of children. Ma'at becomes a powerful concept for development and understanding and transformation of the self. It doesn't allow us to hide. And we will not be able to heal the African inner self unless we look inside. Ma'at, Mawu, Mutnera can give us the courage to look at the ugliest part of ourselves, confront it, move beyond it, and love ourselves. But we can't do this healing work if we continue to deny the female principle, the divine feminine within. We need to do this. We need to do this all the time. It's work. It's painful. But you can't grow if you don't have some pain. And you gotta have some pain. And you gotta cry. Doing Ma'at allows us to develop integrity. It becomes a standard for dealing with the self. We've got to come to know ourselves. The self is the origin of our responsibility to the universe. We keep the universe functioning. Ma'at, as truth process, puts the person in touch with himself or herself, and it results in self-knowledge. It allows us to come to the larger self, the healing self, as Ayikwe Arma says. Ma'at is facing your shadow, confronting the truth, looking in the mirror of your ka. Ma'at is the constant questioning of and answering to the divine aspect of the self, which is the universe. Constantly weighing the balance, making certain that right order is achieved. This is Ma'at, female principle. Ma'at, the mother. Ma'at, the beginning. Ma'at fortifies the inner self if we use it, if we do not deny it. In the process of Ma'at will help us to become more comfortable with who we are. But we can't do that until we look at the ugliest part of us. We can't be warriors if we are afraid to look inside. Doing Ma'at involves self-criticism. It involves asking the hard questions. It's painful because we haven't been used to doing it, because we've been running away. But we have to go there. We have to go to the pain, and we have to face the pain. Life is pain, and we have to cry. Ma'at is the ultimate reckoning with the soul. And only in this way can we build the character which will allow us to deal and to live with integrity. And when we achieve integrity, we will be no longer lying to ourselves. Doing Ma'at helps us to recognize and acknowledge our mistakes without being destroyed by them. Doing Ma'at helps us to resolve conflict rather than being threatened by conflict. When we engage in the process of Ma'at, there is no place to run. You're face to face with your actions, with your behaviors, with your words. And you must ask yourself, why did I do that? Why did I treat her that way? Why did I treat him that way? This is what the mother principle, the female principle, will bring us to do. Ultimately, you have to live with you. And that's the most intimate relationship that you will have, and is the basis for all other intimate relationships. Running from yourself will make you run from relationships. And that is what Ma'at is righteousness, but it is not self-righteousness. It is not being judgmental. It is not feeling superior. The need to feel superior to the person sitting next to you who isn't doing as well as you're doing, you think, that need comes from your weakness. Okay? We got to look at this concept of the self and the concept of the ego. The self is the person. It's an African concept. The ego is based on separating from everything else, from each other. The self is a binding concept. The ego is a separating one. The self allows for love. Ego comes from fear. The development of the whole person in a communal context is something which comes from the self and leads to the self. The self, the African self, is the doorway to the black depths of our inner being and beyond to ancestral consciousness. African people have a concept called Ojiji, the shadow. Ma'at is facing the shadow and moving beyond to the hidden self. Running from the hidden self becomes a sickness. Running from the hidden self becomes a shadow which cannot be lost. Ever try to lose your shadow? The running takes the form of the creation of a facade. Okay, let's see how it works. Because of what you're not facing inside, because of what we're not looking at inside, because of what we're afraid to look at, we create all kinds of bizarre behaviors, which makes it very difficult for people to relate to us. And then we defend those behaviors. And the defense of those behaviors are the things that get in the way of us organizing, getting in the way of us having healthy families, get in the way of us having healthy relationships, get in the way of us even relating to our children. We defend the ego that we have created to hide the self that we're afraid of. Doing Ma'at will help us to be able to have the courage to look at that self. You can deal with it, but you got to get beyond that fear. You can't hide from that. You can't run from it. The more you hide from it, the sicker you get. The more we hide from it, the sicker we become. As a people, collectively, we've been damaged. How could we have experienced what we did without being damaged? But we don't want to admit that we've been damaged because we don't want to feel the pain. We don't want to acknowledge the pain that it feels to say our people have suffered terribly, so we can't heal because we don't acknowledge that we're sick. But we aren't living in a natural state for us. This isn't us. This is sick us. Okay, let's look at specifically what happens. You get a brother. And because relationships are associated with the female principle, and we live in a society which puts down and demeans the female principle and tells the brother he's got to deny that, then he says, I'm going to avoid relationships. I don't need that. That's female stuff, right? Or, oh, and then you have the sister who will avoid the relationships because she'll say, I'll get hurt. So she's not going to do that. So then we can't get together, right? Then you have the brother, this is my favorite, who says, I'm not going to mess with that sister. He says this very proudly. He says, because she's too special and I'm not ready to really commit. So I don't want to mess with her. All right? Now, he's seen to be the good brother because he's being honest. Don't we do that? Okay, right. And he will say and explain to us how he's actually complimenting that sister. Right? Because he said, that sister, she's something else, boy. Can't mess with her. So that's a compliment. Now that's real deep. Because, well, number one, what is the brother saying about himself? All right? And he's supposed to be honest now, but is he really being honest? No, he's not. You know why? Because he's really not running from the sister, he's running from himself. And he's saying, he's not saying this out loud, but he's really saying, I don't want to deal with myself. So I'm not going to deal with a sister who's going to insist that I deal with myself. And what this results in is that there are a whole lot of sisters who are together, got it all together, strong, good sisters who are alone. Okay? When African people run from relationships, they are also running from African-centeredness and from their responsibility to the ancestors. Male-female relationships lead us to ancestral consciousness. You hear what I'm saying? Male-female relationships lead us to ancestral consciousness. That's the way we tap into that. All relationships are mirrors. All relationships are mirrors. They bring you face to face with yourself. They reveal the hidden protected self. And that's why relationships are demanding. It's like walking around the house avoiding mirrors, going through life avoiding relationships. So you have affairs, you have encounters, you have these no-string things, right? Or you have serial relationships. And if you aren't careful, you will find yourself in whatever park you have here. We have Central Park, involved in European anonymous sex. That's what that's about. That's about physical connecting with absolutely no strings. That's what that's about. Your relationship with your parents will be reflected in your relationship with your children and in every relationship that you have. That's real. So if you don't deal with it, if you don't look at them, if you don't do ma'at, which is that female principle, then you will be reflecting negative things in your relationship with your parents, as well as the positive things, without knowing what you're doing. That's why you got to do the looking inside and asking yourself those deep questions. Now, in the dungeons, we were raped. In the dungeons, we were raped. And we've been going there now. We've been going to Cape Coast. We've been going to Elmina. And when we go, the ancestors manifest in us. And our consciousness becomes their consciousness. And it happens to our children. If we take our children to the dungeons, and our children are raped in the dungeons, because that's what was done to us. And our children are being raped now in our communities by our men. And it is and was and should be the role of the mother guardians to protect those children and make that known. And in our illness, in our pathology, in our failure to do ma'at with ourselves, to be honest with ourselves, to heal ourselves, to have that courage, in that illness, the mothers who should be the guardians are now being the keepers of the secrets for the men who are doing the abusing. This is painful. But we need to restore balance. And as painful as it is, as ugly as it is, as much as we've been damaged, we can heal because we have each other. And beneath it all, we are African. And we can give each other the courage to honor the divine feminine within African civilization. We have the divine mother principle to return to, because that's our birthright. And brothers and sisters together, we can do that. And I want to tell you what Aikwe said. If we ask the question, where do we begin? He said, it was left to the women to begin the work of healing. But then he also said, the way is not the rule of men. The way is never women ruling men. The way is reciprocity The way is not barrenness, nor is the way this heedless fecundity. The way is not blind productivity. The way is creation, knowing its purpose. And let me show you the significance of the divine feminine and the African self. Study this well. Mawu is principle. It is spirit. And it is the principle that allows for the completion of the African self, allowing for spiritual wholeness and psychic integration. The heart. It is spirit, rather. Ma'at, heart, as process. It is knowledge of African self, allowing for recentering and balance. We have been off balance. And then Mutneta, which is the divine motherhood. It is a force, it is a womb, which brings love of the African self. This will help us to heal. And in this symbol, this image, we have the sacred womb, which gives birth to the cosmos. That's what that represents. And let me show you what it is that we can do. Well, this is what we will return to. This is what the divine feminine paradigm in African civilization represents. It represents intuition, the symbolic. Symbols are pregnant with meaning, and so allow us to conceive truth. Omenala, our social organization, appositional unity, we have seen that. Omenala, economic organization, market-oriented, socially oriented. And then our cosmology, ontology, and metaphysics, a life-giving asili. We have come back to where we were. This is the natural cycle of African development. It moves from Ma'at. Ma'at gives birth to the African asili. And that allows us to build and to grow and to develop. And in our natural state, periodically, we would need to be renewed. We would need to be recentered so that we could come back again to Ma'at. And so that we would then begin to grow again and we would continue on the spiral. But always there had to be Ma'at Sankofa. Ma'at Sankofa. There always had to be birth, death, rebirth. Sankofa is rebirth, renewal. This was our natural cycle. But then something happened, and we had the unnatural cycle. And what we had was that we became enmeshed in the pathological tissue, the illness, the sickness of Ma'afa. Ma'afa, disconnection from the source, denial of Ma'at, denial of spirit, denial of African being. It made us hate ourselves and become dependent on those who would destroy us. Ma'afa. Ma'afa, pathology for African people. Ma'afa breaks the rhythm of Ma'at. It ruptures the organic connection to the source. And we are in Ma'afa now. We are still in the Ma'afa. The Ma'afa did not end with chattel enslavement. It merely became more devastating because we became mentally, psychologically enslaved. And so we exist in sickness now, in the Ma'afa process. It's a process. And it can get worse. And so Sankofa cannot happen because there is illness here. And we are involved in a sickness which is like cultural AIDS. That is, it turns us against ourselves. The natural forms within the culture which would have made for our defense are no longer there. So we take in poison. We take in our own death. That's the state that we're in now. We take it in everywhere. In school, in our religions, in the videos that we watch and that we let our children watch. And so we have cultural AIDS, which is based on Nyakudu, lies, dead word. And we are mentally enslaved. And there's only one way for us to be healed. And that is that we have to use the African asili. We need an injection of that asili, which is based on all the principles that you have heard before. And through that asili, we will be reintroduced to ourselves. It will reawaken us. We will reaffirm ma'at and establish ma'atic rhythm again and involve ourselves in these periodic rituals of healing. And so, little by little, the cycle will come back again to the natural cycle. Until we have come here again and can become part of the cycle of life, the eternal cycle of life, in which we can grow to become ancestors. We can reconnect with our ancestors, reaffirm our ancestors. And we can only do this by affirming the female principle. So that we see the process here. Finally, is that Ma'afa, where we are now, represents disharmony, fragmentation, dishonesty, the unknown, which is frightening for us, discontinuity, disconnectedness, and chaos. And through the ritual of Sankofa, which is returning to the ancestral consciousness and getting the strength that is there, it allows us as a healing ritual to move to Ma'at. And so we come full circle and allows us to establish harmony, wholeness, truth for what is known, continuity again, reconnecting, and we establish order. But that's not going to be easy. That only comes with being truthful with ourselves, with looking inside and being able to face the demons that we see within. So let us affirm the divine feminine principle, which is the warrior principle, spiritual warrior principle, that will allow us to have the courage as African people to heal together. Madasi. Thank you.